got time if you want to sit, Jim.
Really?
Because I'm going to introduce you, so.
Oh, okay.
It's hard. Going to welcome everybody.
A lot of people signing in, so.
And you guys are hot right now.
All right. Everybody can hear me? Yes. All right. I'm Srinath Dekad. I'm the department head for mechanical and aerospace engineering here at North Carolina State University. I want to welcome you all to our annual Hassan Distinguished Lecture Series. Professor Hassan was a longtime faculty in our department. He was here for 56 years. And he was instrumental in growing our aerospace department since the inception in 1962. So he has contributed a lot to our program, and as part of his legacy, he also created a distinguished lecture series in aerospace engineering. I think it's like the 8th or 9th one, I think. 11th one, okay, I'm sorry, before my time. So every year we invite distinguished lecturers who can talk about aerospace engineering and also provide their perspective on different topics. Every year has been different, and this year also we are getting another interesting perspective on space-related topics. This legacy of Dr. Hassan is continued by his son, Dr. Basil Hassan, who is an alumnus of the department, 3-time alumnus of the department, currently at Sandia, and he continues to support the department and build on the legacy that his father has created in the department. So I invite Basil to say a few things about Professor Hassan and also introduce our speaker.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Is this mic working? All right, good. So I want to thank you all for joining us today, both those of you in the auditorium as well as our friends who have joined online. As Srinath said, Hassan, I'm director of the Engineering Sciences Center at Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and a 3-time alum of this department. My job this morning is to welcome you all here to the 11th Hassan Distinguished Lecture. This lecture was created about 2015 and really through the support of former faculty, students, and other alums to recognize the legacy my father has left in this department. As Srinath mentioned, he spent 56 years here, came here in 1962 from Virginia Tech to help start the aerospace program. This lecture continues to serve as part of his legacy, and even after lecturers to come in. The program outlines much of my dad's history, and he was really dedicated to the success of the aerospace program, its research, contributions to the profession, and most importantly, the success of the students. And I'm really thrilled to see so many students here today in the audience. His legacy continues to support the department even after he's gone, as well as the College of Engineering through graduate fellowships, a distinguished professorship, both being funded by the NC State Engineering Foundation as well as the AIAA Foundation. Today I'm really thrilled to introduce our speaker, James G. Mazer, or Jim, who's both a friend and colleague. As you can read in the program, Jim has more than 40 years of global aerospace experience, leadership, spanning entrepreneurial space launch, human space flight, as well as commercial and military jet engines. He currently serves as president of James G. Advisors, LLC, a strategy, leadership, and technical execution consulting firm, although he told us last night he doesn't like consulting. Jim does hold a BS and MS degrees in engineering from the University of Akron and an MBA from UCLA. He held a graduate research fellowship at the NASA Glenn Research Center before joining McDonnell Douglas, which is now part of Boeing, where he was involved in the design and analysis of the Delta-class launch vehicles. He started as a structural engineer, eventually ascending to the role of chief systems engineer and president and general manager of the multinational Sea Launch Company. During his career, he's held a wide variety of leadership positions, including prominent roles as president and COO of SpaceX, president of Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne, and president of L3Harris, just to name a few. I had the opportunity to meet Jim about 15 years ago through our various leadership positions in the American Institute of Aeronautics. Jim is a former president of AIAA, and he's received many different honors, including the 2000 George Lowe Space Transportation Award, and was elected to 2 of AIAA's top honors, fellow in 2015 and honorary fellow in 2023. So for a guy who's held so many senior positions, I can just tell you that Jim's a regular guy. Through AIAA, he's demonstrated his passion for the profession, including prioritizing giving back to students and young professionals. He's a great example of a guy who once got an engineering degree from a small university and ultimately has become one of the most influential and senior leaders in space and aeronautics. For those students and early career professionals in the audience, Jim's a role model for every engineering student and demonstrates how hard work, determination, and probably a little bit of luck can enable one's career. When Jim accepted our invitation to be the lecturer, he said he was truly humbled and honored to be able to come and speak here today. And he told me yesterday he's hoping to get lots of questions and he wants this to be an engaging conversation. So as he's going through his remarks, start thinking of some. So without any further delay, please join me in giving an enthusiastic Wolfpack welcome for our speaker, Jim Baser.
Thanks. Okay, how's everyone doing? Oh, that doesn't sound very enthusiastic for a Friday morning. Are you guys hungover? No. Okay. All right, well, first of all, I want to thank the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering for inviting me, and especially Basil for personally reaching out to me and asking me to do a lecture in honor of his late father, Dr. Hassan. I think Basil's father and I must have crossed paths at AIAA, but I don't think I ever had a conversation with him. But knowing Basil and knowing the kind of lectureship that's been set up, I'm sure he was a great father and a great educator. So I really appreciate that. I don't have any PowerPoint charts and I don't have any videos. So if you're waiting for something to entertain you, this is it. And so we're gonna talk about a lot of things today. And if there's something I'm saying that seems confusing, because I'm gonna go a little bit fast and I'm gonna try and keep it kind of basic, but exploration is a complex topic. So if there's something that I said that you don't really understand, feel free to raise your hand in the middle and we'll talk about it. And certainly I hope we have time for questions at the end. So what we're going to chat about is, first of all, I hope you're here because you're interested in space. And so one thing I want to do is provide you all a perspective on what I think is going on in space to help give you a perspective of the landscape in space, because it's huge and complex now compared to how it used to be. And maybe to help you navigate choices you have if you want to go into the space business, because there's so many choices, and it's hard to evaluate. I took the first job that was offered to me, and it happened to be in space, and it's been going on from there. But today we're going to chat about the evolution of the space program and the emergence and proliferation of commercial space, the evolving role of U.S. government in space programs, and mostly I want to focus on the human exploration of space and how NASA and industry are addressing that together and how that's evolving over time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my perspective of the current approach versus potential other models for human exploration of space. So I'm going to go through my experience a little bit, not because I like to talk about myself, but I got to actually experience the beginnings of commercial space and became a very active participant in it early on. So I hired into McDonnell Douglas in the mid-'80s when Reagan was president, and I thought I was going to work Delta rockets, and I worked a week, and they assigned me to the Star Wars program. That's the precursor to missile defense. They were trying to figure out how to sense bad guys doing bad things from space, and so we designed, built, and launched 3 custom satellites in 6 years to run experiments in space. It was an exciting time. I immediately got hooked on, one, velocity. They didn't care how much money we spent. They just wanted us to go fast, and we had to hit dates. And by the 3rd satellite, we were allowed to take hand sketches down to the shop with our signature on them, and they were machining and making hardware. The thing about that, though, is if it wasn't right, it was all on you because nobody was checking your work. So there's a lot of fun and to some degree a little bit of stress. And I have a story about that we could talk about later. In this time frame, in 1989, McDonnell Douglas conducted the first commercial launch to space. It was in March of '89. It was on Delta One and was called a Horizons 1 spacecraft. And then in the early 90s, I did tons of studies on how to evolve from Delta 2 through Delta 3 to Delta 4, which is a much bigger rocket, was a heavy lift rocket. And we did a ton of different studies. And then in the mid-90s, we won a contract from Hughes Space and Communications, and they were worried about not having enough supply, so they went out and contracted with a number of companies. Delta was one of them, McDonnell Douglas, Sea Launch was another, and MHI with a Japanese rocket. They contracted all 3 of us for 10 firm launches and 10 options. And so that kicked off the Delta 3 program. I became the chief systems engineer. That rocket failed 72 seconds into its first flight. I have a whole story about that, but I got put in charge of the failure investigation, and at that time, Boeing had bought us, and they were a part owner of a company called Sea Launch. And Sea Launch was a Norwegian, Russian, Ukrainian, and American joint venture to launch commercial satellites from an ocean-going platform on the equator. And this rocket was actually a little bigger than Falcon 9 is today. And so I went over to them as chief systems engineer, and then I became president. Well, I was president of Sea Launch. First, I'll get into a couple of other things I didn't talk about. In the mid-'90s, I want to highlight this. McDonnell Douglas did something called DCX, and you can look it up in your spare time, Delta Clipper Experimental. This was a vehicle we built that was supposed to be sort of a research vehicle for potentially single-stage orbit, vertical lift and vertical landing, liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. So we did, with RL-10 engines, we went out, did vertical lift, went up over 30,000 feet, came point down, swiveled, and landed, and then in one case turned around and launched again 24 hours later. So we demonstrated a lot of vertical lift. We just couldn't figure out how to make money at it. And so Sea Launch was 100% commercial. We launched DirecTV, XM Radio, Dish Network, no government business at all. So 100% commercial, 100% privately financed. In 2000, Blue Origin was founded. In 2002, SpaceX was founded. 2004, there was a first Spaceship One flight. Spaceship One is the one that hangs under the airplane and then drops and goes up into space, does a parabolic. That became the precursor to Virgin Galactic. In 2006, then, while I was running Sea Launch, I got to know a guy named Elon Musk who wanted to start his own commercial space company. I tried to get him to invest in Sea Launch, and he said we were too established. And so we kept talking, and in 2006, he hired me to be the first president and chief operating officer. I lasted 8 months. That's a whole nother story about rockets and how I thought we should go about things versus how he thought we should go about things. But in that time frame then, Pratt Whitney had bought Rocketdyne from Boeing and asked me to become Pratt Whitney Rocketdyne. And that was, we basically did all the Saturn V engines, the shuttle main engines, Artemis engines, et cetera. So a lot of liquid propulsion stuff from there. So I literally went from one end of the spectrum at SpaceX and entrepreneurial space to the other end of the spectrum with NASA risk-averse human space flight. And so it was a drastic change for me, I can tell you. In 2011, Space Shuttle had its last launch. In 2012 was the first commercial cargo. 2020 was the first commercial crew. In 2021, Virgin Galactic and New Shepard had their first commercial flights, putting people into a suborbital arc. So that's, you know, an amazing history of the evolution of commercial space flight over the past 30, 40 years. And so over the past 10 years, there has been an inordinate amount of private capital flowing into space. I've never seen anything like it, and it's been going on. I thought it would only go on for a few years. It keeps going on. There's tons of new capital invested. You see these new companies doing Series B, C, D. Their valuations are in the billions of dollars. And right now, there's nearly 700 companies worldwide in the space business. They're in launch services, satellites, defense technology, space infrastructure, manufacturing. When I was with L3Harris, my boss is Chris Kubasik, and he would call me and say, "What do you know about Stoke Space?" And I'm like Googling real time, who the hell Stoke Space? I never heard of them. They just raised a bunch of money too. But there's so many companies, you just can't keep track of them. And I'm like, okay, they're doing something interesting, but I know nothing about them. Over the past 10 years, over $66 billion has been raised for space. In 2024, 200 companies raised $8.2 billion. So this is a crazy, exciting time for space. And if you're interested in space, this is a great time to be interested because there's tons of opportunity out there and tons of fun to be had. And everybody's trying to move fast, and there's a lot of opportunity to take on a lot of responsibility and risk to some degree. But I would argue there's a narrative evolving that the commercial space economy is now so large and successful, who needs the US government involved in commercial space, particularly NASA, other than just to buy services? And I would argue that the results are mixed. Commercial space is doing really, really well with spacecraft. Their capabilities in orbits, they're innovating and developing things way faster than the government ever could. You see like Starlink and Kuiper and even the governments, they're using SDA satellites, they're calling them tranches for defense, and they're moving for the government relatively fast, slow for commercial space. So it's really advancing things way faster than these gigantic, really, really expensive satellites DoD used to build and put them in geo orbit. They're putting them in low Earth orbit. So that's going gangbusters in space. Human space flight, I'm not so sure, and I'll talk about that in a lot of detail. And then really the thing that I can't wrap my head around are business cases. When we were doing commercial space, we had to have, how much are you going to invest? When's money going to start coming in? How's cash flow? Are you going to run out of money before you make money? And are you going to make money? And so all of those things were really important. And I look at a lot of these companies, it's not clear to me what the answer are to any of those questions, but it doesn't matter because they have a ton of investment right now. And I tell people, for this industry, I wasted time getting an MBA because nothing I learned in that degree applies to the space business. So what it is now is about, and it's an interesting model, and I didn't understand it at the time I was at SpaceX. It's clear that Elon did because he had come from sort of the dot-com era. But the idea is not so much about how to have a good business case. It's about how to hit a milestone where you can raise more money and increase the valuation of your company. And so that was so foreign to me as a businessman. I couldn't wrap my head around it, and it took me years afterwards to figure out what was going on. And we argued about it. I'm like, we're going to go broke. And he's like, nah, we'll get plenty of money. And I said, all right. And he was right. For some, it's working out, right? Rocket Lab's a company I had predicted a long time ago I thought was going to be successful. You look at what Pete Beck was doing, and they're doing great. They're public. They're still not profitable, but they're raising money. They're buying other companies. They're working on Neutron. I thought Firefly was going to be successful. The jury's still kind of out on that, but they're working with Northrop Grumman. They just bought Maxar. Or they don't, no, Intuitive Machines bought them. They bought another company. Part of what some of these companies are doing is they're out buying other companies to expand their portfolio. And a lot of those companies actually do have a business case and are profitable and are providing cash flows, because that's kind of some of the model that's going on with them. And for some, it hasn't worked out. They reach a point where in this model where you hit a milestone and you raise more money, and that's how you keep going. But if you don't hit the milestone, you go out for more money and nobody's there. And Virgin Orbit's a classic example of that. They had a failure. They went out to raise money. They couldn't. Sunday night, they called all the employees and said, don't show up Monday. I mean, it was really that fast. I mean, they thought they were going to have money coming in Saturday, and Sunday it didn't, and that was it. They probably put $1 billion into that business and infrastructure. Rocket Lab bought most of it for $30 million. So it's and that's another reason why Rocket Lab's is successful. And for some, and I will highlight, SpaceX and Blue Origin, potentially Vast, maybe Relativity. These guys have access to what appear to be unlimited funds, right? So they can go out, raise money anytime they want, and if they can't, Bezos will sell some stock or something like that. So it's a very interesting phenomenon in the space business. And I'm not making a judgment about that. I'm just making an observation that it's a very interesting time in terms of me being a businessman, looking at the space business and seeing how it's moving forward, and having the realization that it's way different than the way I grew up doing business. So in human spaceflight, I think we've had 3 significant eras, and we're on the verge of the 4th. We obviously had the Apollo era, where we went to the moon, flags and footprints, everybody talks about that. The shuttle era, building space station in low Earth orbit. Commercial cargo, commercial crew, right? So the shuttle's retired, and then you just go commercial for cargo and crew, which makes a lot of sense. And now we're on to the Artemis era, which is to go back to the moon, this time stay there, and learn how to live on the moon and go on to Mars. And so this is a really exciting time in terms of being on the verge of that era. So one of the questions I have for you guys to consider, and this is where there's the debate going on, given the progress to date and the huge private investment and capital being put into space, do you all believe that private space can take over most or all of human space exploration? And there's a lot of people out there advocating that we potentially don't need NASA anymore per se, that commercial is here, it's here to stay, and that's the way of the future, and legacy space is dead. So I want to look at that a little bit more closely. I think, first of all, many opinions differ because many people, and particularly I think a lot of the investors investing in this sort of technology in this market, don't really understand space. They think it's probably like airlines and airplanes, just a little bit harder. But it turns out the physics are tremendously different for space. The technology, the challenges are way, way harder for space. The distances, I'll talk about those in a little bit, are almost incomprehensible relative to what we're used to. And the commerce and economics, as I said, there's a sense that the commerce and economics are going to be like they are with the airline industry, but I'll talk about how that is yet to be proven out. And when we talk about distances, so ISS, International Space Station, is about 250 miles above the Earth. LEO in general is up to, you call it 1,000, 1,200 miles. But LEO, if the Earth were a peach, LEO would be the fuzz on the peach. The moon is about 240,000 miles away on average, which is quite a bit different than LEO, right? And a round trip, the way it's currently planned, and I'll talk about that a little bit, would be about 2 weeks. Mars, and this is where people are saying, well, it's the moon and then Mars, and what's the big difference? 250,000 miles to the moon. Mars ranges from 33 million to 249 million miles from Earth. And a round trip mission will be anywhere from 2 to 3 years, depending on the relative position of Earth and Mars when you take that trip. And clearly, the further away you are from Earth, the more complex the mission. And it's not just launch, which is getting a lot of attention. It's the travel there, it's the radiation, it's the physiology. And when you get somewhere, you got to have a place to stay. You probably need power, probably need oxygen. There's all kinds of things that go along with living off of the Earth. And the further away you get, the more complex that gets. And there's landing and returning to Earth. The further away you are from Earth, in general, the higher your return velocities are in coming back to Earth. So returning to Earth from the moon is about 10 times more energy and heat you have to dissipate in velocity than it is returning from low Earth orbit, and that's significant. So I'm going to start with LEO, and I would say it's arguably the easiest of space destinations. As I mentioned, there's a very strong, thriving LEO economy. It's not just human exploration based, and actually where it's really thriving is satellites, the communications and data, observation, defense. We talked about Starlink and Kuiper. So commercial's leading the way, right? I talked about that. And my opinion is the shift to LEO is really what allowed large rockets like Falcon 9, which also was designed for putting big satellites in GTO in an expandable manner. When you go to LEO, it's much closer, and so this rocket can have a lot of fuel left over, which allowed to evolve to powered landings. And so I think the emergence of the LEO economy that I didn't see, and I'm not sure we saw it other than ISS, which isn't a lot of launches, the emergence of this LEO economy has created that ability to come back and do powered landings. But even Falcon 9 on one of the, they did a launch, I think, I can't remember the company, but they did a launch to GTO, geosynchronous transfer orbit, and that was expendable because they had to use all the fuel to do that launch. And that's how it used to be. No matter how big your rocket was, the satellite guys wanted all of it. And so we used it all. But how about U.S. Human space flight in LEO? So International Space Station has been the primary destination. It was NASA-led, NASA-owned, NASA-funded, and it was key to the construction phase, the space shuttle was. You had Space Shuttle and ISS. Space Shuttle was key to constructing International Space Station, with NASA leading an international community and basically paying for it all, owning and operating it. November 2nd this month marked 25 years of continuous presence in orbit. So we had 300, this is approximate and things are constantly changing, but 300 people from 26 countries, 13 private visitors from 7 countries. I think there's been 11 commercial crew missions since 2020. And I want to highlight the term commercial is used very loosely when it comes to space. To me, it's more of a contracting mechanism, which is you buy some sort of service at a fixed price, whether that service actually exists or not. But what's key about this is the commercial company helps fund the development, and even a significant portion of the development, and in doing so, caps how much the government has to spend, and the private company takes on a lot of the risk versus the government carrying all the risk. It's obviously very attractive to NASA and DoD because they have fixed budgets, and getting co-investment and risk sharing is very attractive to the government, and I'll talk about more of that on later. But to summarize, in 25 years in low Earth orbit with humans, we've had 300 people, 13 private people, 11 commercial missions, and a handful of commercial missions, not to International Space Station. So in terms of a LEO space economy, it's impressive, but it's not eye-watering when I look at it from a business standpoint and from a space economy standpoint. And this is low Earth orbit. So, the International Space Station is currently planned for retirement in 2030. And right now, the plan is not to abandon low Earth orbit, but to enable commercial space stations. The original plan had always been a continuous presence in space. There seems to be some waffling going on that right now with Sean Duffy as the acting administrator, came out with sort of man-tended, meaning maybe we'll have people there for 30 days at a time and maybe not have anyone there for a period of time. That's not really clear what's going on. I'm not clear. We'll just have to pay attention and see. But as of September this year, it looks like NASA is going to spend up to $1.5 billion to support at least 2 companies to demonstrate crew-tended stations. And this will allow NASA to focus on the next step in humanity's exploration of the solar system. And I think this makes sense. I mean, to me, this is the model, right? NASA built the infrastructure in space. They enabled sort of commercial private companies to go to low Earth orbit with people. Now they're trying to enable commercial companies to create space stations in orbit that NASA can just buy services to go to the station occupied. Other countries can buy it, private individuals, pharmaceuticals, whoever wants can buy that to go to low Earth orbit. It's the easiest of the space travel, and let NASA focus on the next hard thing to do, which is a permanent presence on the moon. So that all, from a model standpoint, makes sense. And for the commercial space stations, there's a lot of players out there. Axiom, Blue Origin with Orbital Reef. There's Vast. Vast is another company. There's a guy named Jed McCaleb who's got, I don't know, somewhere nearly of $1 billion into Vast. They're out raising additional monies, and they're definitely going to be competing to be one of these 2 companies. Also, Sierra Space, and there are others. I think at the end of the day, you'll see Starship will have a version of a low Earth orbit commercial space station too. I don't think it's been formally announced, but I think that's going to play out. Phase 1 started in 2020, and an announcement has NASA is going to have a announcement for proposal late this year. And the intent is to award multiple Space Act agreements in 2026 for these commercial stations. And then the follow-on phase is NASA will purchase services from these guys. So I talked about the model. This allows NASA to go on to permanent presence on the moon, learn how to live on the moon, and then go on to Mars. So it's called M2M, Moon to Mars. Makes complete sense. But here's what I can't wrap my head around is after decades of humans in low Earth orbit, at best we will have a couple of private space stations by 2030, and that's at best. People are wondering whether that's even going to be the case. And we believe that LEO human spaceflight economy is now so robust that we are ready to do the same thing commercially on the moon now, right? And so I'll give you my perspective. To get here, I took an Uber to LAX, flew from LAX here, Basil picked me up, I stayed at a hotel not too far from here, and those are all commercial services. So I might not be up on current events, so if any of you know different, I'm not aware of a ticket I can buy to go to the moon or a hotel I can stay at when I get there. And so, you know, that would be the goal, right? But we are not there. So this idea of extending a commercial model in low Earth orbit to the moon seems quite odd to me. Okay. So Jared Isaacman, he's been renominated to be the NASA administrator. He was nominated, they pulled it, they renominated him. And I've been kind of trying to read up on what he's been talking about. He posted a statement that I really like the energy and focus on the moon, especially any endeavor that could unlock an orbital or lunar economy. Once we crack the economic code, we will have the answer and funding as to why we need lots of people living and working in space. So this is a guy nominated to be the NASA administrator, and he's saying we need to crack the economic code on the moon. I agree with him, and I'm all in on that. And what could be the commercial, you know, mining, pharmaceutical, orbital computing, I don't know, but that needs to be figured out. So let's talk on humans to the moon, and the goal is a permanent presence. So the major architectural elements to get to the moon and back, and I'm just talking about to the moon and back, there's a ton of elements needed just to stay on the moon, and power and comms and those sort of things are critical. But crew to lunar orbit. So we have the Space Launch System rocket that was launched once uncrewed. It's going to launch crewed around the moon this spring. I think February is the target date. It'll probably slip a little bit, but in that time frame, crew around the moon with the first woman to go around the moon, a crew of 4, first time a crew of 4. And that's going to be the precursor to Artemis 3, which is supposed to land on the moon. There's a gateway in lunar orbit that's being built, and the lunar orbit is called a near rectilinear halo orbit. This orbit is highly elliptical around the moon, comes close and goes further away. And the reason the orbit's attractive is because it's a low energy orbit. It's sort of between the gravity points of the moon and the Earth. And so it's very low energy to maintain that orbit. And also it has line of sight comms with the Earth the whole time in its orbit. But it is a seven-day orbit. So the idea is that SLS delivers the Orion spacecraft to this elliptical orbit around the moon, and then the human landing system will come meet up with Orion. The first mission, I think Gateway's not there, so they'll just dock together with the human landing system, go from Orion, human landing system, or go through Gateway to the human landing system, go to the moon, hang out for 7 days, because you have no choice, come back, and then transfer back to Orion. Orion comes back to Earth. So that's the general plan for how things are going to work. And so the human landing system then, right now 2 companies are under contract, right? And we're hearing a lot about the human landing system, so I'm going to talk about that. There's SpaceX with Starship. They were awarded $2.9 billion in April of 21 for Artemis 3, and an additional $1.15 billion for Artemis 4. And the approach and the vision is fully and rapidly reusable, cost-effective, high-frequency lunar missions with 100 tons of cargo, which is absolutely impressive. It's absolutely an incredible mission. There's a lot that has to happen for that vision to turn into reality. The way it works is Starship sends up a tanker. There's a Starship tanker that goes into low Earth orbit. And when it's in low Earth orbit, it's nearly empty. So you got to send up a bunch of refueling missions, at least 8, to fill that tanker up. Then the Starship human landing system gets launched. It mates up with the tanker, transfers all the fuel into the human landing system. That human landing system then goes on to lunar orbit, crew transfers to it, and it goes down to the surface of the moon. This Starship is liquid oxygen, methane, or natural gas, that kind of thing. So it's going to sit on the moon. It's going to sit on the moon for 7 days and then come back up and then transfer back to Orion. Orion comes back to Earth. So Starship to date has performed 11 test flights. The last 2 are successes, but has yet to reach orbit or complete on-orbit refueling. They're planning a Starship version 3 in 26, which is supposed to be a long-duration flight test and fueling. So you can imagine just the fueling in low Earth orbit still has a ways to go, let alone getting out to the moon, landing on the moon, staying 7 days, lifting off. That's a lot. Sean Duffy, who's the acting administrator, stated SpaceX is falling behind and he will open the contract to other companies. And so that created a lot of response. And on the 20th of October, Elon responded, SpaceX is moving like lightning compared to the rest of the space industry. I agree, the rate at which they're building and testing stuff is amazing. My personal opinion is 11 test flights is a lot, but that's the path they're taking. And he says, moreover, Starship will end up doing the whole moon mission, mark my words. So that, the idea is you got Starship and you don't need Orion, you don't need SLS, you don't need Gateway, you don't need anything else. And that's clearly where they want to head strategically. And then after he calmed down a little bit, on the 30th of October, he said, they're formally assessing a simplified mission architecture, a concept of operations we believe will result in a faster return to the moon while simultaneously improving crew safety. And I can't find any details on what that simplified approach is. My guess is, though, it's less ambitious, meaning less cargo to the moon simultaneously, probably a smaller version, and then other safety improvements. I don't know. I can't find anything on it so far other than those statements. Blue Origin is out there, and they're under contract with Blue Moon. They got an award for Human Landing System in May of 23, $3.4 billion for Artemis 5. And they have an industry team. They're going to launch on New Glenn, which is LOX methane first stage, I think LOX hydrogen second stage. The lander is LOX hydrogen. Their concept's similar, but a little bit different. They're going to launch a tanker, a fuel depot into low Earth orbit. And they're working with Lockheed Martin for something called a cislunar transporter. That's going to mate up with this fuel depot and take it to lunar orbit. No, they're going to fill it up in low Earth orbit. Then it'll mate with the cislunar transport, and the full tank will be taken to lunar orbit. Then they'll launch the Blue Moon lander, which will then mate in lunar orbit with the tanker, fill up in lunar orbit. Then it'll go meet up with Orion, the crew will transfer, they'll land on the moon, and then they'll come back. This is liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, which I would argue is a very deep and hard cryo. And both companies are working on cryo storage methods, and they put out some press releases on that. It appears they're going to start off with 2 Mark I uncrewed launches as demo launches. I think one of the Mark I's is going to carry that Vipers experiment, which is going to look for volatiles on the south pole of the moon. And then crewed Mark II, which is much larger, is planned to be the crewed landing. And one comment I would make, though, as far as I know, other than now there's been 2 New Glenn launches with a hydrogen upper stage, Blue Origin has very little experience with liquid hydrogen in space. The engine they're going to be using on the lander is not the one that flies on New Glenn. And I will tell you, I have a lot of experience with liquid hydrogen, and liquid hydrogen on the moon for 7 days is something that if you're on the moon, you want to be sure it's going to work, is how I'd characterize it. We were toying around with my head of engineering at Rocketdyne. We were like, let's pre-position backpacks on the moon. So if that doesn't work, they can strap them on and fly up to lunar orbit and be kind of Iron Man style or something. So when you look at both HLS, Human Landing System concepts, they're both single stage landers. Right now, Starship lander is 50 meters high. The Blue Moon is 15 meters high. And the reason, first of all, the reason single stages of interest is the engines that land you on the moon have to get you off the moon. And I haven't read or seen anything they're doing, but you don't know what especially at the South Pole, we're not sure what it's like when you land on that surface and what the heck happens while you're landing, especially relative to your engines. The other thing with height, what's of interest is one is stability, right? The other thing, when we first landed on the moon, they were wondering, how far are we going to sink in? You know, and that sort of thing. You know, 50 meters high, depends on where your CG is, but you know, you don't want to tip over. We had a commercial lander that, I think it was Intuitive Machines, right, that tipped over and got a little bit, and I think an Indian one did too. And so, you know, that's a real concern. The other is the crew's always on top. So you got egress, you know, you got to get out, get to the moon, and get back up. And so that can be a challenge. Both are cryogenic, which means you got to keep them cold, and both require cryogenic transfer, fuel transfer in space. And these are items that don't have a high level of technology readiness relative to human spaceflight, and they're working to mature that. But those are all firsts, and there's many more for Artemis 3 alone. But the idea behind the reason we pursued these concepts is reusability. If you went to a two-stage lander, you'd leave the lander down there, and you'd only have the ascent stage, which potentially could be reusable, but it's not fully reusable. And there's this concept pursuing full reusability from the get-go. Apollo was storable propellant two-stage. Storable means you don't have to keep it cold. In fact, you probably have to heat it to keep it warm enough so it doesn't freeze. But by storable also, the fuel and oxidizer, when you mix together, they ignite automatically just from the chemical process, which makes it very, very reliable. And it was only 7 meters high, which gives you that stability and easier egress and ingress. And so I want to talk about, there's something called the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel. They noted in 2024, their annual report, and you can look it up, it's kind of a dry read, but there's some interesting things in it. They stated, with the current technical readiness level of some segments of the architecture, the Artemis 3 mission is oversubscribed. And then they listed the first time milestones, and there's 14 listed in that on the page, that will have to all be achieved on the first landing on the moon with crew. So to me, there are significant technical departures from Apollo. And the approach that's being used is justified by a sentiment that I pulled off of SpaceX website that says, NASA's Artemis program was born out of a visionary goal to truly explore the moon and place the first footprints on Mars, not to repeat the accomplishments of Apollo, not to be another entry in the long list of short-lived exploration initiatives, but the opportunity to finally build a sustainable presence on another planet. I am completely on board with that. I've been looking to be part of that for 30 years at least, right? So I'm completely on board. But, you know, when I was growing up, and when I remember this, in the 70s, you know, we were making all kinds of movies. We thought we'd be living on the moon by the year 2000, let alone by now, and likely onto Mars, you know. The space station would be like a hotel, you know, and we'd be going back and forth to low Earth orbit and using that to go to the moon, all kinds of fun stuff. So I'm completely on board with that. Go to the moon, establish a permanent presence, and then move on to Mars. But right now, my position is I see an inordinate amount of time, money, energy, and risk being spent on technology simply to get to the moon. And I would argue we already have the technology to get to the moon. We don't have to do it the exact same way, but we already have mature technology to get to the moon. We should be spending time, money, and risk on staying on the moon. And I think new ways to get to the moon are interesting. I think we should pursue them when we're ready, adopt them. But to me, it's a distraction from staying on the moon that we should be working on right now. And the other thing the industry has learned on high-tech developments is that if you put required technology development on the critical path for system development, it will always take more time and money than planned, and usually way more. Learned it over and over again, and that's why you start hearing the traditional companies going, we are no longer bidding fixed price technology developments because they've lost a lot of money at it. And the current companies are losing money too, but remember, they're motivated by milestones, cash flow, valuations, that sort of thing. So it's a little different motivation, but nevertheless, so you know, these well-financed companies could say, well, listen, you know, you're not putting anything at risk. It's our money, but when we're going back to the moon, it's our time. It's taxpayers' time, and believe it or not, China has stated they will have people on the moon in 2030, and they're usually within a year or two of their predictions. They aren't wildly off. So, are we on a path to be there before 2030? And so, so I believe using proven technology and capability now and insert new and evolved technology when it is proven. That's been done over and over again. It's called spiral evolution or other activities. When it's ready and safe, rather than going for the end vision from the start, which is way more challenging and will likely run into obstacles. And I have a kind of an example. I was trying to think, you know, what would be an example of what I'm trying to say? So Lindbergh flew the Atlantic in 1927 with a prop plane, right? The turbojet engine concept came out in 1930, 3 years later. The first transatlantic commercial flight was in 1939 with a propeller. Nobody said, hey, we got this we got this jet concept. Listen, man, propellers, been there, done that. People have flown the Atlantic. Let's go to the jets and let's develop jets and just, you know, move on that direction and don't fly over the Atlantic until we have jets again. The first transatlantic commercial jet flight was 1958. So nearly 20 years after the first commercial transatlantic flight with propellers. And that's kind of, I'm not advocating against advanced technology. I'm not advocating against airline operations to the moon. I'm just saying, I don't want to wait. Why should we? Let's go with what we have now, and when that's ready, transition to it. I think that's a better model. And so that's kind of what I'm arguing for. So, like I said, I'm all in on the vision for human exploration and permanent presence on the moon. And I'm tired of waiting, man. I literally, I'm retired now. I literally thought I was going to be part of the next moon landing. Absolutely thought. And I don't know, maybe if I didn't retire until I was 80, I don't know, but and maybe I'll rejoin when I think it's really real. I don't know. I really want to be part of it, and I wanted to be, you know, right there, going go for launch, all that, and so I'm tired of waiting. So in my mind, what this means, and a lot of people are against this, continue to use SLS until something better is proven, ready, and safe. And I get it. SLS is expensive, expendable. I have some ideas for reusability if you want to talk about that later. And so is Orion. But that's what we got. And it works. And Orion and SLS will have crew around the moon early next year and be likely ready to have crew ready to land on the moon. But we need a lander, and we need the ability to stay on the moon for 7 days, and that's a big deal. So a lot of people are advocating for canceling SLS now. Another reason for SLS is it's called translunar injection. So compared to New Glenn and Falcon 9, not Starship. Starship's a whole nother game with the refueling and everything. But and Vulcan, the vehicles that exist today, SLS has twice the translunar injection capability. They're around 35 metric tons for translunar injection, and right now SLS in its current version is around 70, and there's a growth version with a more energetic upper stage that goes up to 90. Believe it or not, going to the moon, size matters. And so you can take more crew for a longer period of time, potentially co-manifest some cargo kind of things with it. So, and that's a capability that exists, so we ought to use it. So those are really important. The other comment I would make is creating another gap in capability is the last thing this nation needs. From when Apollo 17 retired to the first shuttle launch was a 9-year gap. From when the shuttle launch was retired to the first commercial crew was a 9-year gap. And I would argue, why create a 9-year gap when we can be moving forward, establishing a permanent presence on the moon, and go with the new technology when it's ready? And SLS could actually get a moon mission done in 2 launches if you put the lander on top of SLS, which currently isn't the model. No designs In fact, it wasn't allowed to launch on SLS. So this nation needs consistency and purpose. One of the things that happened when I was running Rocketdyne is the precursor program to Artemis was called Constellation. Obama was president, and it was canceled. And the sentiment was, why go to the moon? We've been there, done that. We're going to go out and lasso an asteroid and bring it back around to Earth, or go do something with it. That created a huge shift from the overall direction of LEO, Moon, and Mars. And that set us back, God knows how many years. I remember Charlie Bolden calls me. He was the NASA administrator. He said, Jim, we're canceling Constellation. We want new and innovative ways to leave the surface of the Earth. And I look at one of my VPs and I go, Charlie, I ain't got none. Because, I mean, it's still chemical propulsion and everything everyone's doing. You know, it might be nuclear electric propulsion or nuclear thermal propulsion to go to Mars that could be developed, and I think those are critically important. But I'm a fan of Star Wars, man. I love they hop in the thing, they take off, they go into space. I don't have a clue to do that, and I've run one of the biggest propulsion companies in the world. I've asked for ideas. I never work on rotating detonating engine, and I put a lot of money into that. But you know, there was a concept in the 60s called Orion, and the concept was you had this spacecraft with a giant pusher plate underneath it, and you blew up nuclear bombs, a series of nuclear bombs, and it would push against the plate, and as you kept blowing up nuclear bombs, it would propel you potentially and theoretically to the speed of light. Now that's a cool concept, but I don't think anyone's open for that right now. So now I just want to talk about Mars quickly, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but it's way, way harder than the moon. 33 million to 249 million miles away, depending. And so there's two limits of that travel. One is called conjunction class missions. That's a minimum energy mission, meaning require less fuel basically to get to Mars, but it requires you to stay at Mars or Mars vicinity for 300 days. And so that turns into be about a 1,000-day round-trip mission. There's opposition class, which requires more energy, which is less fuel, but that then turns into a 30 to 50-day stay at Mars. And then that's about a 760-day mission. NASA, last I looked, and you can choose anything in between. You don't have to choose one or the other. But I looked at NASA, and they have a reference mission in 2039 that's 850 days and 66 days on Mars. Obviously, I think something in that ballpark is going to be what we have to do. But Mars is not just about staying there. It's how to get there and back alive. And people are saying, well, people are going to send people to Mars right now, you know, or in 5 years. I'm like, great. If they're alive when they get there, they won't be alive after they land. And if somehow they manage to survive that, you know, have fun for a couple days. So I believe NASA's job is still to do the hard things. I think NASA is still relevant. I think they can lead the world in human exploration with international cooperation and be the leader in creating the infrastructure in progressively more challenging locations that can then potentially be leveraged into a thriving economic model. So I'm all in on that, but I think we're not ready for private industry to create a lunar economy or a Martian economy at this point in time, my opinion. I think it would be extremely premature to suggest that NASA is becoming obsolete and shrink them drastically and just send taxpayer dollars to private industry, at least not until we've colonized Mars. The other comment I want to make is NASA has clearly stated there are national objectives for leading this endeavor, for the human exploration of space. Exploration in science, which is more than just commerce. National posture, being a leader in the world, and believe me, that is important to nations all around the world, trust me. There's a lot of publications out of China about the whole reason to go to the moon is for national posture. It's a big deal to them. And for inspiration, of course. So Jared Isaacman, he has something called an Athena plan. I can't get a copy of it. I think it's supposed to be secret. It got leaked to a couple people about his ideas for NASA. But he listed in there, he wants to ignite the space economy. And I think that's a key point. Because in addition to those three pillars, NASA has very much been on a path to ignite the space economy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that is stated outright. They've been working with commercial space, and I think it should be a formal fourth objective. And it's definitely led to what I think are very productive NASA industry partnerships. As I said, I'm concerned with the path NASA has taken to expand buying commercial services, because more and more the service doesn't actually exist at the time they buy it. They also appear to be the only customer. So I don't know how you can go enter into commercial services when it doesn't exist and you're the only customer. It's really commercial contracting, right? Like I said, I'm a businessman, and I would have been fired if I presented a board of directors that plan. But NASA simply doesn't have the budget to do the job. It's just reality. So they have to rely on private investment. If I asked you what percentage of NASA budget do you think DoD's budget is? How is NASA's budget compared to DoD's budget? Exactly. DoD's budget's around $800 billion. NASA's is $25 billion. Okay, so when you think about what we're asking NASA to do, $50 billion would be a reasonable budget, and we wouldn't even notice it. And the accomplishments and leadership it would create, but NASA doesn't have that. So they have to rely on these private partnerships. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but when you enter into these commercial services agreements, I think there are some sacrifices and prices the nation and taxpayers pay. And one of the biggest is, in many cases, NASA doesn't own the intellectual property. So, because these companies are investing more than, they're investing more than NASA's investing. So they're investing a lot of money. They own the intellectual property, which means it doesn't get shared. Now, this industry I grew up in, intellectual property was shared widely. The purpose of NASA, the purpose of AFRL, purpose of a lot of research organizations, develop technology so the entire industry can benefit and learn from it. And these companies, SpaceX, Blue Origin, wouldn't exist if they didn't have the technology that NASA developed to build upon in the first place. And we're breaking that model of where the new technology is. The other is when I grew up, any issue anybody had, and I'd study across the world, it's hard to find out what the Chinese or Russia always said it was human error. The Chinese was hard to figure out, but generally in the Western world, whenever there was an issue with a rocket, we understood, it was published what the issue was. You understood what the root cause was, and the whole industry would learn from those issues and become better as an industry because of that. Now, issues that are encountered are kept secret. Sometimes you don't even know if there is an issue. And that, I would argue, that's not good for the industry, but the contracting method doesn't allow NASA to share the information. So I think that's one comment. And then in the advisory safety, in the ASAP, stated in the 2024 report, NASA's control of aspects of Artemis 3 mission assurance, which means safety, is not direct. NASA's role and effectiveness in managing risk and safety outcomes for services contracts will be a panel focus in 2025. So, you know, and we could argue that NASA is extremely risk averse, but when I was at Pratt Whitney, they did a lot of jet engine stuff. You know, they said, you know, if a fighter crashed, it was a bad day. But if an astronaut dies, that's a national crisis. And that's how it's always been treated. But there's a happy medium in between where, you know, they are going to be astronauts going to space, and we need to be sure we truly understand the risks and go eyes wide open into that risk. The other final thing I would say about this with this contracting model is the use of taxpayer dollars often is for more, you know, spending taxpayer dollars in government-run activities are not paradigms of efficiency. They're not intended to. But there are societal benefits that you also want to get from taxpayer dollars. So when NASA contracts in their more traditional methods, they require that some of the money go to small disadvantaged businesses. They require you go to veteran-owned businesses. They require you go to minority-owned businesses. And ideally, that gets spread about all the states. So you're developing small businesses, which is really the engine running this country, throughout the country, that brings high-tech jobs, high-paying jobs, and motivation for people to go in science, technology, engineering, math, and work at that local business, which is, I think, is of huge value to this country. And as a private company, you're not in any way really motivated to do that. And then the last thing is, soft power. NASA also works on international collaboration, and leading the world in a permanent presence on the moon creates relationships and power that, that is through influence and culture rather than through, guns and bullets and that sort of thing, and that's important. So as I stated, we're on the verge of our next great era in space. If you're interested in space or technology, I can't think of a better time to be part of it. I mean, it's not just space and technology. If you're interested in policy, if you're interested in space economics, this is a great time to be in the space industry if you're interested. And what I was hoping to give you is kind of a perspective is if you have choices among different companies, how do they fit into this whole ecosystem? And am I passionate about where they're going relative to the bigger picture? And so I believe, some people would say, there's this or proposition. It's either NASA or it's private industry. It's clearly not an and proposition. It's NASA and industry doing this together. And it's key to making it reality, but we must keep our eye on the vision. Permanent presence on the moon and onto Mars to ensure we're pursuing the fastest, safest, and most cost-effective means to get there. One of my favorite quotes is from Henry Ford, and he said, "Vision without execution is hallucination." And I am optimistically advocating for a sober approach to Moon and Mars. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, James. Wonderful talk. We have time for a few questions, but I just want to tell you after this, a few questions, we are going to have a reception in EB3 in the lobby of the department. So you can spend some time talking to James one-on-one because we have maybe 10 minutes to do the question and then we'll head over there. All right? I guess I see a hand up there first. You want to do that? Right there. Right.
Thank you for the talk. It was excellent. So my dad actually worked on Constellation back in Houston, and I was wondering, I'm so glad that you brought it up because it seemed like we were so far ahead, and then it just got cut out from under us. So how do we avoid in the future having a repeat of that? What steps do we take to prevent these quick changes when a new administration comes in and guts the project that the administration before it set up?
Yeah, that's a tough question, right? Because as administrations change, agendas change. So I think this nation has to wrap its head around, the true vision. Permanent presence on the moon, leverage that to go onto Mars, and to find a way to make that uncancelable, I guess. And it comes back to what's the reason for doing this. And I went through NASA's talked about all the reasons, but as you get a new administration, how do you keep that administration from usurping that? And I don't have a clear answer, but they did come out with a few years ago, I think in Trump's first term, was a bunch of space policy directives. So that was formalizing policy and policy directives aligned towards moving in that direction. So I think getting policy directives at least formalized and bought into, and that's from the National Space Council, which was recreated, is one way to try and create constancy and consistency of purpose. The other way we used to do it is we just built tons of advocacy with congressional members on the Hill. And it used to be, you had these core members that were there for years and years and years, and they weren't going to let anything happen as they change out. One of the things that I had been working with other companies on is we would do, for the new members of Congress that came in, do some educational series, like once a week on Thursday night for an hour, bring them in and explain what our exploration program is, explain, at a high level the physics, the challenges, the options, and that sort of thing. So a lot of it, to me, it's a combination of policy and education is the best answer I have.
Yeah, thank you again for the talk. My question was, do you foresee the industry moving away from solid propellant? And with the advent of this proliferated LEO concept, do you see that forecast changing?
Yeah. To me, I'm a very strong advocate for liquid propulsion for human spaceflight. And I personally have never, maybe I've been biased because I've been a liquid propulsion guy my whole life, liquid rocket guy and all that. But even at SpaceX, Elon and I were completely in agreement, and we're never going to solids. Blue Origin hasn't. Vulcan, the reason you see these rockets strap solids on is an easy way to flex up capability, right? And then it's a really easy way to flex up capability to have it for certain missions and not. And so that's the temptation. Delta IV was never supposed to have solid. I was one of the architects of Delta IV, was never supposed to have solids to it. All liquid hydrogen vehicle, relatively light, they couldn't resist, so they strapped solids to it to add it. Drove me crazy. But I think solids' primary place is in the defense industry. And that's where you need rapid capability, safe storage on ships, all that kind of thing. I think liquids ultimately are the best answer for human spaceflight. That's my opinion. I'm sure there are others, but I think solids are more for defense and liquids are much more for exploration.
Once again, thank you for the talk. Something that stuck with me as you were speaking was the sort of tension that you were bringing up about NASA's future role in spaceflight, along with the sort of retreading of old ground with new methods of getting to the moon. Do you think that perhaps the reason why private companies are more focused on new methods of getting to the moon is to sort of demonstrate that private industry is capable of coming up with new, innovative, better methods than NASA has for these problems that we're facing, so as to maybe phase out NASA's role in the future when we move past the moon to Mars?
I think that's the ultimate goal, and I would argue, to me, that's the model, right? When I talk about low Earth orbit, which is the easiest, it's like, okay, in the model, NASA did all the hard lifting, created a destination, has been the primary customer, but NASA's got to move on to the moon, so private industry, LEO's all yours, right? But even that, the LEO human exploration economy is not assured at all. And that's my whole point is, which means how could we extend that model that's not assured in LEO to the moon? Eventually, I think that's the good model. The idea, Elon says he wants airline-like operations, regular flights all the time, going to the moon, you're sitting there, and they have, the sketches of, 10 starships, in the background sitting on landing pads. That's great, I'm all in. Jeff Bezos, I was fortunate through AIAA to sit next to him at a lunch years ago, and I'm like, why are you doing this? And he said, when I started Amazon, it was at a time when the internet was created, nobody knew what value that would create for the world. It was created, nobody knew how to make value of it, and the internet is driving the economy of the world, right? I mean, there's no doubt about that. And he said, I want to build the infrastructure for the space economy. And I'm not sure what it's going to bring, but once I build the infrastructure, it's going to drive a space economy. So that's what he firmly. So both the visions, I think, are valid. The only thing I'm arguing for is when's it going to happen, and are we just going to abandon what we have now until that comes along, right? When that's ready, that's why I use the jet and prop analogy. Go to jets, you have propellers, use them. Fly all over, fly across the Atlantic until something better comes. When it comes along, we're still flying prop planes, but not across the ocean, right? So when that technology is ready, fine, call that obsolete and bring the new technology in. But let's not delay our progress on building a permanent presence on the moon until that vision is achieved. That's my only argument.
I want to stop here and you want to come? I think I need to use this. Thank you again. And we want to
make you remember this moment maybe on your mantle.
Thank you.
And,
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me take the mic before we take the picture. All right. You want to be in the middle?
I'll hide my water.
Here.
All right, thank you.
So before we close, I want to thank a few people, Basil and his dad, for creating the lecture series, and it's been very successful. It's been bringing great people to campus, not only to hear about great things, but also to show off our program to leading experts in the world about how well we are doing and what kind of students we are creating and the workforce for space exploration. The second thing, I want to thank our communication folks who are there helping, and they've been tirelessly working to make sure this works out very well. And thank you, Charles and team and everybody who've been here. All our students who have been working and helping us. So I want to, again, thank everybody for coming and appreciate the audience here and the questions. Again, we still have time. We can go to EB3, the home of aerospace engineering here, and we'll have a reception, and James will be available to talk one-on-one and some refreshments. All right, thank you again. Thanks for coming.